Jordan Williams was used to flying. As a successful businessman and millionaire, he had spent more time in airports and on planes than most people would in a lifetime. It was a regular Monday morning when he arrived at the airport, prepared for another trip. He smiled at the thought of the upcoming meetings. His business was growing fast, and he had big plans for the future. After checking in, Jordan made his way to the gate. The flight was a short one, but it was important. He was going to meet with potential investors to expand his company. As usual, the airline staff greeted him politely, though there was something about the way they spoke that felt different this time. Jordan couldn't put his finger on it, but it made him feel uneasy. He shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just his imagination. When the time came to board, Jordan handed his ticket to the flight attendant and walked down the jetway. As he stepped into the plane, something unexpected happened. The flight attendants at the entrance looked at each other, exchanging uncomfortable glances. They barely made eye contact with Jordan as he passed them, and Jordan started to wonder if something was wrong. He found his seat in first class, settled in, and was about to relax when, suddenly, a flight attendant approached him. She stood there for a moment, staring at him with a stern expression. "Excuse me, sir, but there seems to be an issue with your seat," she said, her voice cold. Jordan raised an eyebrow. He had flown this airline many times and had never had any issues. "I don't understand. My ticket is for this seat," Jordan replied, a hint of confusion in his voice. "I'm afraid you'll have to leave." "There's been a mix-up," she insisted. The tone in her voice made it clear that this wasn't just a simple mistake. Jordan didn't want to make a scene, but the whole situation felt strange. He stood up, not wanting to cause trouble, but his patience was wearing thin. As he walked toward the aisle, another flight attendant appeared. This one was even more dismissive, barely glancing at him. "I'm sorry, sir, but we need you to leave the plane immediately," she said in a matter-of-fact tone. "It's for your own safety." Jordan was now completely confused. He had flown countless times, always receiving respectful treatment. This time was different, though. He had the strong sense that something wasn't right. His thoughts raced as he walked down the aisle, past the staring passengers. He couldn't help but feel like he was being judged. It wasn't just a misunderstanding, it felt deliberate. As he made his way off the plane, he noticed that no one had said a word in his defense. The passengers sat in their seats, silent, and the flight attendants exchanged glances as if they were waiting for something. Jordan stood at the gate, his mind reeling. What had just happened? Why was he being kicked off the plane like this? His frustration grew, but he wasn't going to let this incident slide. Something wasn't right, and he was determined to find out why. This was more than just a mistake. It felt like an injustice, and Jordan Williams was never one to back down from a fight. As he stood there, waiting for answers, he realized that this was the beginning of something much bigger than a simple airline issue. This was about standing up for his rights, and he wasn't going to stop until he got the truth. Jordan stood outside the gate, his mind spinning. He couldn't quite understand what had just happened. How could he, a regular passenger with a valid ticket, be kicked off the plane without any explanation? He had flown countless times, always in the best seats, and never once had he been treated this way. The confusion in his mind slowly turned into frustration. Something didn't add up. He walked over to a nearby bench, his suitcase still in hand, and sat down. He could feel the stares of other passengers, their curious eyes following him. Some looked away quickly, while others kept watching him. He had been in these situations before, being the only black man in a room full of people who seemed to be judging him. But today felt different. It felt heavier, like he was being treated differently for something more than just a misunderstanding. As Jordan sat there, trying to process the event, a fellow passenger approached him. The woman, a middle-aged white woman, looked at him cautiously, as if unsure whether to speak up. Finally, she did. "I'm so sorry about what happened," she said, her voice low. "I couldn't help but notice how you were treated. It didn't seem right." Jordan raised his eyebrows in surprise. He hadn't expected anyone to say anything. He had assumed that most people on the plane had just watched the situation unfold in silence. "Thank you for saying that," Jordan replied, his voice tired. "I don't know what happened. I've never been treated like this before." The woman nodded, her face showing empathy. "I don't want to make any assumptions, but it seemed like they just wanted you off the plane for some reason. I've been flying for years, and I've never seen anyone treated that way." Jordan felt a pit form in his stomach. He knew exactly what the woman meant. He had faced discrimination before, but this felt different. It wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attempt to make him feel unwelcome. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't the first time he had encountered this type of treatment. His mind flashed back to other moments in his life, times when he had been treated unfairly because of his race. Whether it was in business meetings, at social events, or even just walking down the street, he had often been judged not by his character, but by the color of his skin. Those experiences had hurt him deeply, but this one was different. This wasn't just a stranger looking at him with suspicion. It was a well-organized effort by the airline to get rid of him. "I think they kicked me off the plane because of my skin color," Jordan said, almost to himself. "I've had enough of this, and I'm not going to let it slide." The woman looked at him with a mix of sadness and understanding. "You're right," she said. "It's hard to prove these things, but I saw what happened. You deserve better." Jordan nodded, a wave of determination washing over him. He had faced racism his whole life, but he wasn't going to let it stand in the way of his success. Not now, not ever. He would make sure that this didn't happen again, to him or to anyone else. With a deep breath, Jordan stood up, feeling more resolved than ever. "I'm going to make sure this gets the attention it deserves," he said. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about making sure no one else has to go through this." As he walked away from the gate, Jordan knew he had a fight ahead of him, but he also knew that he wasn't alone. He would use his platform, his voice, and his resources to take a stand. And he wouldn't stop until he made a difference. After the unsettling incident at the airport, Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to understand what had really happened. Why had the airline treated him this way? Was there a deeper issue at play? His mind raced as he walked back to his car, still upset but determined to get answers. As soon as he got home, he made a call to his legal team. They had handled plenty of business contracts for him in the past, but this situation was different. Jordan explained everything. The way the airline staff had treated him, how he'd been kicked off the plane without reason, and how it felt like something was off. His lawyer, Sarah, listened carefully, taking notes as Jordan spoke. "This sounds like a serious issue," Sarah said after a long pause. "We'll need to look into it. The first step will be to gather information. We can start by contacting the airline and asking for their side of the story." Jordan agreed. He needed answers, but he also wanted to make sure he was prepared. His lawyer got to work immediately, sending emails to the airline's customer service and its legal department. They requested any information related to the flight and the staff involved in his removal. It wasn't much, but it was a start. While Sarah worked on gathering information, Jordan decided to do some of his own research. He knew the airline had a reputation, but he hadn't expected anything like this. The more he dug into the company's history, the more concerned he became. There were multiple complaints online from passengers about unfair treatment, but the airline had always brushed them aside or ignored them completely. Jordan found a few old news articles mentioning incidents of discrimination, though they hadn't received much attention at the time. He also found a list of previous legal battles the company had fought, many of them over issues similar to his own. It seemed that this wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was part of a much larger pattern. He paused for a moment, thinking about the situation. How many people had experienced the same thing? How many others had been treated unfairly and never spoken up? Jordan knew that it wasn't just about him anymore. This was a bigger issue, and he had the chance to do something about it. The following day, Sarah called him with an update. The airline had sent back a vague response, saying they were looking into the matter and would get back to him. They didn't apologize, and they didn't offer any real explanation. It was exactly what Jordan had expected, empty words that meant nothing. Frustrated, but not defeated, Jordan decided to take a different approach. He would use his platform to draw attention to the issue. As a successful businessman with a strong social media following, Jordan knew that he had the power to make noise. He started sharing his story online, posting about the mistreatment he had faced and the lack of response from the airline. Almost immediately, his followers began to rally behind him. People from all walks of life began to share their own stories of discrimination, adding their voices to his message. The post quickly gained traction, reaching thousands of people in just a few hours. It wasn't long before the media took notice. Jordan knew that things were starting to change. His fight for justice was just beginning, and he wasn't going to stop until he had the answers he was looking for. The airline couldn't ignore him forever. He was determined to make sure they wouldn't. As the days passed, Jordan's frustration only grew. The airline's silence was deafening. He had expected some sort of apology, or at least a real explanation, but instead, he was met with excuses and delay tactics. He had already been through so much to get here, and he wasn't about to give up now. Jordan felt more determined than ever to get to the truth. His social media campaign was gaining momentum. People from all over the country, and even some from different parts of the world, began reaching out to him with their own stories of unfair treatment. Many of them shared stories about being judged by their appearance, being ignored or dismissed by customer service, or facing barriers because of their race. It became clear to Jordan that the problem wasn't isolated. It was a widespread issue that affected many people. The more he heard from others, the more motivated he became to make a difference. One evening, as Jordan sat in his office, he opened up his social media accounts. His inbox was flooded with messages. Some were supportive, others were angry about what had happened to him, but many offered advice and guidance on how to take action. He read through each message carefully, making mental notes on the ones that seemed helpful. One message stood out among the others. It was from a well-known civil rights lawyer, Marcus Freeman, who had worked on high-profile cases of discrimination in the past. "Jordan, I've been following your story, and I admire your courage in speaking out. I believe we can take this further. If you're serious about making a change, we need to organize. I can help you bring this issue to light on a much larger scale. Together, we can hold this airline accountable." Jordan was intrigued. He had heard of Marcus Freeman before. The lawyer had been involved in several cases that had led to significant changes in corporate policies. If Marcus was willing to help, it could be a game changer. The next day, Jordan met with Marcus at his office. The conversation was straightforward but powerful. Marcus explained the steps they could take to bring a lawsuit against the airline, but he also emphasized that public pressure would be key. They would need to get the media involved and keep the story in the public eye. With Jordan's strong following on social media, this could be their opportunity to shine a spotlight on the airline's behavior. "We'll file complaints, we'll demand answers, and we'll keep pushing until they have no choice but to act," Marcus said, his voice firm. "But we need to make sure that people understand this isn't just about one man. It's about all the people who have been mistreated and ignored for far too long." Jordan nodded. He felt a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the countless others who had been hurt by companies that didn't care. This fight would be bigger than one bad experience. It would be about setting a precedent and creating real change. Over the next few weeks, they worked together to organize rallies, media interviews, and public statements. Jordan's story continued to spread, reaching more and more people. As the media coverage grew, so did the pressure on the airline. They couldn't hide from the truth anymore. The public was watching, and they were demanding answers. Jordan realized that, in a way, this whole experience had transformed him. He had gone from a businessman focused on his own success to a leader in a movement for fairness and equality. This wasn't just about a fight for justice for himself. It was about creating a world where people of all backgrounds were treated with respect and dignity. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jordan was ready. His mission had only just begun. It had been a few weeks since Jordan began his campaign to bring attention to the unfair treatment he had experienced. The media coverage was growing, and his efforts to raise awareness about the airline's discrimination had started to make a real impact. But Jordan knew that it wasn't enough to just raise awareness. He needed change, and he needed it fast. He was ready for the next step. One morning, Jordan was sitting in his office, looking over some documents when his phone buzzed. It was a news alert, and the headline caught his eye. Airline announces ownership change amid public scrutiny. Jordan quickly opened the article, eager to learn more. He was surprised to read that the airline, the one that had treated him so poorly, had just been sold to a new group of investors. The announcement made it clear that the airline was going through significant changes, with a new leadership team taking over effective immediately. The news was unexpected, but it gave Jordan a flicker of hope. He knew that this was a rare opportunity to push for change from the inside. The airline was clearly trying to distance itself from its troubled past, but Jordan wasn't about to let them get away with simply changing the name at the top. He wanted answers, and he wanted accountability. As he read through the article, one name stood out: Alec Harrison, one of the new owners. Alec wasn't just a businessman. He had a reputation for being a strong advocate for equality and social justice in the corporate world. Jordan had heard of him before, especially for his work in helping companies change their cultures to be more inclusive and respectful. This was the man who now had a significant say in how the airline would move forward. Jordan didn't waste any time. He immediately contacted his lawyer, Sarah, to discuss the next steps. "We need to get in touch with Alec Harrison," Jordan said. "If there's anyone who can make a real difference here, it's him." Sarah agreed. She quickly found contact information for Alec's office and sent an email requesting a meeting. The message was clear. Jordan wanted to speak directly with Alec about the mistreatment he had experienced and the larger issue of racial discrimination within the airline. Within a few hours, they received a reply. Alec was willing to meet, and they set up a time for the following week. The meeting with Alec was a turning point. Jordan arrived at the office with a sense of cautious optimism. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew that he had to be firm in his approach. Alec greeted him warmly, shaking his hand and thanking him for taking the time to meet. "Jordan, I've been following your story," Alec began, "and I want to make it clear that we take these issues seriously. The behavior you described does not align with the values we want to bring to this company. I understand how upsetting this must have been for you." Jordan felt a wave of relief wash over him. Alec's words were promising, but Jordan knew that talk was easy. He needed to hear a plan of action, something concrete that would ensure that this kind of treatment never happened again. "I appreciate your words, Alec," Jordan replied. "But I want to see real change, not just policies on paper, but actions that show the company is committed to doing better. We need to rebuild trust with customers, especially those who have been mistreated." Alec nodded. "I agree, Jordan, and I want you to be a part of this process. We are already putting together a team to evaluate our company's practices, and I'd like you to help guide us as we make these changes." Jordan was taken aback, but pleased by Alec's offer. It wasn't just an apology. It was a commitment to work together. Jordan knew this was his chance to make a real difference, not only for himself, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by the airline. "I'm in," Jordan said, his voice strong. "Let's make sure this never happens again." As the meeting came to a close, Jordan felt a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time since the incident, he felt like real change was within reach. The days after his meeting with Alec Harrison were filled with a mixture of hope and determination. Jordan couldn't believe that the man in charge of the airline was not only willing to listen, but also committed to making real changes. It felt like a huge step forward. But Jordan knew that words were just the beginning. Now, it was time for action. Alec kept his promise. A few days after their meeting, Jordan received a formal invitation to join a newly formed advisory committee tasked with addressing the issues within the airline. The committee would focus on everything from customer service to hiring practices, ensuring that the company would be more inclusive and fair to everyone. Jordan couldn't have been more excited about the opportunity. This was his chance to make a meaningful difference. The first meeting with the committee was scheduled for the following week. Jordan arrived at the airline's headquarters, eager to get started. The meeting room was filled with a mix of new faces, other experts in diversity and inclusion, as well as some members of the airline's senior leadership team. Alec greeted everyone warmly and quickly got down to business. "Thank you all for being here," Alec began. "We have a lot of work to do, but I want to make it clear that we are committed to changing the culture of this company. We're going to start by listening. We need to understand where we've gone wrong and how we can do better." Jordan was impressed. Alec wasn't just talking about the changes he wanted to make. He was listening to the people who had the experience to guide the way forward. For the first time, it felt like the airline was on the path to real transformation. Over the next few weeks, Jordan worked closely with the committee. Together, they developed a series of policies aimed at eliminating discrimination and creating a more welcoming environment for all passengers. These changes weren't just about making things look good on paper. They were about real, lasting improvements. They decided to implement mandatory training for all employees on diversity and inclusion, focusing on teaching staff how to recognize and address unconscious bias. They also started to look at the airline's hiring practices, making sure that they were bringing in people from diverse backgrounds at all levels of the company. But the changes didn't stop there. Alec and the committee were also committed to improving the overall customer experience. They created a new customer service team that would be responsible for handling complaints quickly and fairly. If a customer had a negative experience, they would be able to speak to someone who would listen and take action. The company also began to improve its outreach to communities that had historically felt excluded or overlooked by the airline industry. As Jordan continued to work with the team, he began to see the impact of their efforts. The first signs of change were small: an employee apologizing for a mistake without hesitation, a customer service representative taking extra care to make sure a passenger was comfortable. But Jordan knew that these small actions were just the beginning. They were a sign that the culture of the company was shifting in the right direction. The media also began to take notice of the airline's efforts. News outlets that had once covered the company's troubles were now reporting on the positive changes taking place. People were starting to recognize that the airline was committed to doing better, and the public's perception of the company was improving. Jordan felt proud of what they had accomplished, but he knew there was still much more to be done. The road to full change would be long, but with the leadership of Alec Harrison and the hard work of everyone involved, Jordan was confident that they were on the right track. The journey was just beginning, and he was determined to stay in the fight, pushing for justice and equality every step of the way. As the weeks passed, Jordan's efforts to bring about change within the airline began to show results. The work of the advisory committee had led to several important reforms, and Jordan was proud to see how the company was evolving. There was still a lot to be done, but the direction was clear. The airline was no longer the same company it had been when Jordan had first boarded that plane. It was now a company committed to fairness, inclusion, and equality. One of the most significant changes was the new sensitivity training program that was rolled out across the entire company. It was mandatory for all employees, from the flight attendants to the senior leadership team. The training didn't just focus on addressing overt racism. It also aimed to address unconscious bias, teaching employees how to recognize their own biases and how to avoid letting them influence their behavior. This wasn't just about teaching people to be nicer to others. It was about changing the mindset of everyone who worked for the airline. Jordan had the chance to attend one of the first training sessions. As he sat in the room with other employees, he felt hopeful. It was clear that the company was taking these issues seriously. The training was thorough, and it wasn't just a one-time thing. The airline had committed to holding regular sessions, ensuring that the lessons learned would stick and continue to improve the company culture over time. Alongside the training program, the airline also made strides in improving its hiring practices. They began working with organizations that specialized in diversity and inclusion to ensure that they were hiring people from a wide range of backgrounds. The goal was to make sure that the company's workforce reflected the diversity of the communities it served. This was a long-term process, but it was an important step toward creating a more inclusive environment at all levels of the company. In addition to the changes made within the company itself, the airline also took steps to rebuild its relationship with customers. They set up a new customer relations team, one that was specifically trained to handle complaints and issues in a more compassionate and effective way. No longer would customers be brushed aside or ignored. The new team worked quickly to resolve any issues, ensuring that every customer felt heard and valued. One of the first public signs of the company's transformation came when the airline announced that they would be offering free tickets to people from underserved communities. It was a gesture of goodwill, but it was also a sign that the airline was taking responsibility for its past mistakes and was genuinely trying to make amends. The announcement was met with positive reactions from the public, and the airline's image began to improve. As the months went by, Jordan saw more and more signs of change within the company. Employees seemed more engaged and motivated, and passengers were starting to notice the difference. The airline's customer satisfaction ratings were rising, and the company was receiving positive media coverage for its efforts to improve. Even the employees who had once been hesitant to embrace change were starting to come around, realizing that this was not just a temporary fix, but a lasting transformation. For Jordan, the real victory was in seeing how far the airline had come. When he first boarded that plane, he never could have imagined that his experience would lead to such widespread change. But now, as he watched the company take responsibility for its past mistakes and work toward a better future, he knew that it had all been worth it. He had fought for justice, and in the end, that fight had sparked something much bigger than he had ever imagined. A movement toward equality, fairness, and respect within an entire industry. The changes within the airline were undeniable. What had once been a company known for its mistreatment of customers and employees was now a leader in promoting fairness, respect, and inclusivity. Jordan couldn't help but feel proud of what he had helped achieve. However, he knew that this was just the beginning. The real challenge was maintaining the momentum and ensuring that the progress they had made would continue long into the future. Jordan's role in the airline's transformation was far from over. As one of the key figures on the advisory committee, he was now deeply involved in helping shape the company's policies and practices. He attended regular meetings with the leadership team, discussing everything from new customer service initiatives to ways of making the workplace even more inclusive. But it wasn't just about policy. Jordan wanted to make sure that the company's new culture was being felt on every level, from the top executives to the frontline employees. One of the things Jordan was most passionate about was ensuring that the changes weren't just superficial. He wanted to make sure that every employee, from the flight attendants to the pilots, understood why these changes were so important. To achieve this, Jordan worked closely with the training team to develop programs that focused on more than just rules and regulations. The goal was to create a culture of empathy and understanding, where employees genuinely cared about providing the best possible experience for customers. As the months went by, Jordan began to see the positive effects of these changes. Passengers who had once been hesitant to fly with the airline because of past negative experiences began to return. Social media was flooded with positive reviews, and customer satisfaction scores soared. The airline was now being praised for its commitment to making every passenger feel valued, regardless of their background or appearance. But Jordan knew that one of the most important aspects of the airline's transformation was the work they were doing behind the scenes. The company had created an employee resource group where staff members from all departments could come together to discuss issues, share their experiences, and offer suggestions for improvement. This group had become a powerful force for change, ensuring that the company's policies were always evolving and improving to meet the needs of its diverse workforce. Jordan also took on a personal mission to connect with some of the airline's most loyal customers, those who had stuck with the airline through its difficult times. He visited airports, met with passengers, and even took part in several customer service events. Through these conversations, he was able to hear firsthand how much the changes had meant to people. Many passengers shared their gratitude for the airline's efforts, saying they had never felt so respected on a flight before. Jordan's influence extended beyond just the airline. As word spread about the company's transformation, other businesses began to take notice. Jordan was invited to speak at conferences and workshops, sharing his experiences and advocating for more inclusive practices in the workplace. His story was one of resilience, leadership, and the power of standing up for what's right. He had become a symbol of positive change, a reminder that one person's efforts could make a difference for many. As Jordan looked back on everything that had happened, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. The fight for justice hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. He had seen a company change from the inside out, and in doing so, he had helped pave the way for a more inclusive and respectful future. But more importantly, he had learned that no matter how big or small the challenge, standing up for what's right would always lead to something better. Jordan's journey was far from over, but he was confident that the road ahead would be one of continued progress and success. Months had passed since Jordan first boarded that flight and was unfairly kicked off. The road to justice had been long and difficult, but the changes that had come from his experience were undeniable. What started as one man's frustration over an unjust event had turned into a widespread movement for fairness and equality within the airline industry. Jordan had become a symbol of what it meant to stand up for what was right. The airline's transformation was remarkable. It wasn't just about fixing policies or improving customer service. It was about changing the very heart of the company. Employees from all levels had embraced the new culture, and the results spoke for themselves. Complaints about discrimination dropped significantly, and passengers who had once avoided the airline now felt comfortable flying with them. Jordan had seen firsthand how a company could change when it took responsibility for its past and worked hard to do better. The company's success wasn't just measured in numbers. It was also seen in the way employees interacted with each other and with passengers. The sensitive training programs that had been put in place were beginning to take root. Flight attendants smiled more, pilots were more approachable, and customer service representatives listened to concerns with genuine care. It was no longer just about offering a service. It was about offering an experience where every passenger felt valued and respected. Jordan's involvement in the process had been crucial. He had not only helped shape the policies and practices that made the airline better, but he had also become a mentor to many employees, teaching them the importance of empathy and understanding. He had become a trusted voice in the company, and his influence had helped guide the airline through some of its most difficult times. But the changes didn't stop at the airline. As word spread about the company's transformation, other businesses began to take notice. Jordan was invited to speak at conferences and forums, where he shared his story and his insights on creating a more inclusive and respectful workplace. He became a sought-after speaker, offering advice to companies that wanted to follow in the airline's footsteps and make real changes of their own. For Jordan, the greatest reward wasn't the recognition or the accolades. It was the knowledge that he had made a difference, not just for himself, but for so many others. He had fought for justice, and through his efforts, he had helped create a better future for everyone who interacted with the airline. Every time a passenger boarded a flight with the company, they were met with a new experience, one where respect and fairness were a priority. As Jordan looked back on everything he had accomplished, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The battle had been tough, and the journey had been long, but he had stood firm, never backing down from what he knew was right. And now, as he stood in front of the new team at the airline's headquarters, ready to help guide them toward even greater success, Jordan knew that his work was far from over. The legacy of what he had helped build would last long after he was gone. The changes within the airline were just the beginning of a broader movement toward equality and respect in all industries. Jordan had shown that one person could make a difference, that no matter how big or small the challenge, standing up for what was right would always lead to a better future. And with that, he knew that his journey would continue, pushing for progress wherever it was needed.